So I'm going to wait about a minute for the attendees to start connecting.
Can actually anybody see my screen?
I can, but it's not in presentation mode.
I know.
Yeah.
If I flip to presentation mode, it will cover all the three screens I have in front of me, and I don't see the presentation anymore, or you
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we're going to start. Hello, everybody. My name is Bill Coakley. I'm from BSMA. Welcome to a webinar on comparators. A little housekeeping before we begin. Mike, for the attendees who have registered, microphones, the video, and the chat have been disabled. If you do have a question, which time has been reserved for towards the end of the hour, they can be typed in the Q&A session, which should be in the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it immediately on the bottom of the screen, hit there's three dots. You'll see that, and you'll see that there's a drop down for Q&A. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded. Presentation slides in the recording will be sent out probably next week to anybody who registered for that event. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Sasha Sonnenberg, who's the moderator for this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill, and welcome everybody to today's BSMA webinar on optimizing comparator sourcing in clinical trials. Before we start with this very interesting topic, I would like to briefly ask the panel to introduce themselves. And looking at my screen here, Inga, can you please start?
Yes, of course. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Inga Nadezhnikova. I'm Senior Supply Chain Manager working at Amgen, specifically on a comparator sourcing, and I'm excited to be part of this forum.
Thank you very much, Inga. Pelin, do you want to go next?
Of course. Hello, everybody. This is Pelin here. I am a team head comparator management in global clinical supply organization Novartis. Really look forward to exchange on comparator sourcing topic today.
Thank you very much. Philip?
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Philip Müller. Until recently, I was a general manager for comparator sourcing within the Thermo Fisher Scientific organization and just changed my role recently in July. Happy to be with you today and have a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Philip. And then Tony, who is making the effort to join us in the middle of the night from Japan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Yes, I'm Tony Stolas. I am with Capgemini's Life Sciences team, and my focus is on supply chain and technical operations in life sciences, and comparator sourcing being a very important part of the life sciences supply chain. So looking forward to talking about that during this session.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tony. Well, and briefly about myself, for those who don't know me, my name is Sasha Sonnenberg. I'm currently heading business development at a CRO called Sanaclis in the industry for almost 20 years, always with a focus on the clinical supply area. So today's webinar is about optimizing comparator sourcing in clinical trials. And of course, over the last years, we have seen how the demand for comparator medication in clinical trials has grown significantly. And the importance, and also a topic that we want to cover, the costs associated with the continuous rise of the comparator needs throughout the clinical trial is essential. And being well prepared and looking at opportunities on how to streamline and overcome some of the many challenges that we see on the clinical trial comparator sourcing side will be discussed today. And we will start with a topic that I heard about it first. It's like financial waste. And the first question that I have here is going to Tony. And given the high value of especially some of the biological drugs that we can see, can you share information on the potential financial impact and the financial waste generated when we talk about comparator sourcing in clinical trials, maybe for a specific clinical trial, but I think the magnitude when we talk about the entire industry is somehow eye-opening. At least it was for me.
Absolutely. Happy to talk about that a little bit. So if you think about a comparator sourcing in specifically in biotechnology beyond just sort of small molecules, one of the things that we see is, you know, a typical large biopharmaceutical company, you know, will at any point in time have, you know, could have hundreds of clinical trials going on, and could have, you know, hundreds of patients in those trials. And a lot of these drugs are related to oncology, immunology, extremely high dosage costs. You're seeing some of this information, I believe, right now. But so it's pretty average for a large biopharmaceutical company to be carrying at any point in time $1 billion worth of inventory of comparators, just comparators. And on an annual basis, it's also pretty typical that 25% or so of that is wasted. Now, when we say waste, it means it ends up expiring before it can be used. And so the financial impact for that is huge. If you roll that across the number of companies in the industry, obviously it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. And then, of course, that's just the financial impact. We'll talk also about a little bit later about the sustainability impact, environmental impact, and such, and the opportunity cost that's going along with that. So, Sasha, happy to dive into more detail if you like, but I think that's a pretty good overview.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tony. Any of the other panelists you want to add or comment, share your thoughts on this topic and insights, of course?
Maybe I can go next. When it comes to waste and optimization, so basically, as Tony pretty much defined the waste meaning in clinical trials, and many times when you look at the comparators area in clinical trials, where there are a lot of focus on the blinded medication, at least in my company, in Novartis, we had or already have a lot of focus on blinding comparators, but at the same time, there's a lot more commercial products that has been needed and used in clinical trials, where many times these sourcing is being done local teams, and local teams is focused for the most part is around clinical project management, where the capabilities of these teams really focus on clinical aspect, where supply chain capabilities are not always at the center of their capability, and shifting these activities from local teams to more central approach to supply chain expertise background colleagues basically is a bit more efficient planning, considering supply parameters, and in the end optimizing a planning perspective, and in the end less waste has been acknowledged. And for sure the technology is another aspect that we look for. And IRT has been, is one of the main solutions when it comes to optimizing comparator planning. Constantly, we're also looking for optimizing parameters, but is the next thing is now we would like to explore is AI capabilities.
Okay, thank you. Philip?
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Inga.
Yeah. I just wanted to add to what Pauline was saying. It really also comes to how the trial is designed by the clinical operations, the cooperation. If it's non-existing between the supply chain and the clinical operations, there will be a lot of waste. And there needs to be taken into account the aspects of which product and which presentation is really the best for this trial. Because that decision ultimately will result in how much product is going to be utilized, how much is the waste percentage, even like how big bottles are we choosing, right, for the dosage, and what kind of presentation, how many cycles, anything that we can impact based on what actually is available in the market, that will definitely help. I just wanted to add that portion. So that's something that we've also tried to do, to have really that earlier involvement, earlier assessment, to make sure that we are designing the trial from the start to be more successful in a way of preserving the product and not wasting it.
I think a very important topic, and I want to come back to exactly this one, but Philip, you wanted to add something as well?
Yeah, just adding one word on the financial impact, as maybe some of you know, as a vendor in that space, we see a lot of biopharma and biotech companies coming to us for sourcing their products. And for a biotech company, it's easily, a project is easily 15 to 20 million of comparator cost for one project. So imagine if you have, as Tony was just saying, a few hundred of trials in your pipeline to run. This can go, I have seen budget for comparator going above the 500 million threshold for some large companies. So the financial impact is real, and waste management is obviously one of the concern for the industry in terms of reducing that financial burden.
Before we come to how to reduce and optimize and streamline the process for comparator sourcing, we're talking about waste from a financial perspective, but to what extent is what we all understand as sustainability and the environmental waste and impact considered in the comparator sourcing area?
I can taking a shot at that, and others can jump in here. So in terms of sustainability, obviously there's the pure act of having to destroy in most cases the expired material, which has environmental impact. There's also environmental impact because more of the drug was made in the first place than was needed for that comparator. So the interesting thing that happens is there's sort of an artificial increase in demand signals for the manufacturer of the comparator, which drives the amount that they produce and then increases waste. So it's the making of it and the destroying of it is all waste along the way. The other thing that's interesting in terms of the financial impact, and I might be jumping the gun, I know we were going to get into this at some point, but with the way that these materials are procured, these comparators, by contacting the number of vendors that make this material available to biopharmaceutical companies as comparators, a lot of times it's pretty normal to contact 3, 4, 5 vendors and have them all go search for the material at the same time. The manufacturer doesn't necessarily know that that's one piece of demand. They might be picking up a signal that it's 5 pieces of demand. So there's an inflated demand signal from that perspective as well. So those are some of the factors, but I would love to hear from my co-panelists on that too.
Maybe on sustainability, maybe as well from the vendor lens here. I don't think the sponsor would take much care today about the sustainability when he decides on the sourcing strategy. I give you just one example that sometimes we're able to source products from the APAC region, let's say like that, to be blinded in Europe or in US for EU patients and US patients, and we source in Asia Pac because it's lower cost just for that, and the logistics costs are not considered as to reduce the sustainability in that case. So I don't think, given the financial impact we just mentioned before, that sustainability comes a lot into account when deciding on the sourcing strategy. Last word, I think the carbon footprint of a pharma product is very high. So in terms of comparator sourcing, we buy the product that is needed in a clinical trial, right? You won't choose a product because it has a lower carbon footprint than another product.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Inga, Pelin, anything from your side?
Yeah, I think I agree with Philip. Like initially, when the sourcing strategy is being decided, it's not one of the factors that unfortunately I think the companies are looking at. However, what we are trying to do is throughout duration of the trial, and what I am doing, I'm collaborating with my sustainability lead, and to see if there's any way we can preserve the product. And some of the examples are, if the product has an excursion, we try to assess all of the product weekends, and then we calculate sort of that it's not going to the waste. Or when we can no longer use the product, is there any way we can donate it so it doesn't end up in a landfill? So we're kind of trying to calculate that aspect of the waste. And the third one would be, can we consolidate the shipments, right? A lot of times there we are ordering, placing the purchase orders, multiple purchase orders per month with different delivery dates with the same supplier. And then maybe we can, wait a couple weeks for the shipment. So we really try to consolidate multiple shipments so the supplier can just do one delivery with the one dedicated truck to our warehouse. So they're like definitely small things, but I feel like even the small things, if everyone is doing that, they do matter. So those are just some of the examples that I kind of come to my mind.
Thank you. Pelin, you wanted to add something?
I can relate both Philip and Inga, and as also a sponsor, maybe the carbon footprint is not the major driver, right, at deciding a product strategy, sourcing strategy. But there are a lot of efforts to really, as Inga said, how do we, combine shipments? How do we really reduce the waste, which is another, like carbon footprint is not only come from a logistic, but it comes from an unused material. So huge impact. And really even we focus somewhere, right? We create value in one area. We also try to balance actually what also would be sustainable for the clinical trial to run smoothly, I would say. Anything different than what the colleague said.
Okay. Let's
And then, Sasha, if I could just add one thing to that too, is the good news in this is that even if sustainability as its own element isn't necessarily factored into the procurement decisions, the planning decisions around a clinical trial by the sponsor, as we look at ways to impact or reduce the financial impact of the waste, the same acts will reduce the sustainability impact as well. So it's not where the sustainability and the financial aspects are at odds. The same levers will improve both metrics, financial and sustainability waste.
Okay, thank you. I want to come back briefly to one topic Tony mentioned when having a request for comparator sourcing. The way the industry is structured and built in this area, as you said, it can easily multiply and create a shadow or a virtual demand. Inga, Pelin, is this something that you consider when sending out requests for or sourcing requests for specific products?
Well, it is a policy. So when there's a certain threshold, we do need to do competitive bidding, right, to get the best of the offers. So that is something that, yes, it's done, and I know it's done across multiple sponsors as well, as it's part of the process. However, we do have comparators that we do source on a frequent basis for multiple trials. And if we do have a supplier that has proven, there have been multiple cases, we've done the bidding, we know that this is the best offer that we will be getting, we will go in agreement with that supplier for that specific product. So that's going to reduce that with effect, right? We are no longer going to do separate bidding processes for the same comparator. But unfortunately, we do have to do initially, if it's a new product, we do need to do those couple biddings. And it's also giving a fair chance to the other suppliers, right? If the first time they didn't win the offer, the next time the offer will be more competitive. So there is kind of two sides to that, but definitely there is an impact. So whenever we can, whenever we have a case to justify we can just go with one supplier for this specific product, we definitely do that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm always surprised when looking at comparator sourcing that either the requests are coming very late. The expectations like the comparator needs to be available, not tomorrow, but the day after. So let me ask you a question. It's like when you are planning and looking into optimization, are you performing feasibility or risk assessments at an early stage? And for me, more important, and maybe that's one of the topics that we will discuss a little bit more, is who is actually involved at an early stage in the discussions about your comparator needs and how you're developing your sourcing strategy.
Maybe I can take this one first. So it is the feasibility and risk assessment has become our integral part of our process, and we really do this in early stage while we are designing a clinical trial, basically, and it involves an early drug supply strategy planning, and we have comparator sourcing supply leads where they have discussions with medical team, but also the study leaders to really guide them, first of all, based on their endpoints and what type of data they're trying to generate and what's their purposes in the clinical trial. They, could give options that how the risk mitigation is possible, also options to what is the variability on the costs, and is a generic is an option, and we also, when we have this discussion with the clinical teams at this stage, we also recommend, for the most part, because it's in Novartis it's tend to go more option than more restrict, so to say, in clinical trials. And we rather tend to coach them to go from more product to less product, simply to make it more optimized, and in the end, the less waste. And that's one way we do it. And I do believe that this is, I think, the most impactful approach to when it comes to waste reduction, because if you can influence the clinical trial that early enough, then you're already reducing a tremendous amount of waste in the end, because there are trials also give a lot of option to investigator, because keeping the options open that they believe there is a more attainment, or but at the same time, like sometimes you just if there's 20 product, you're given an option, maybe with 5 product, you achieve the same result. And this is basically what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Inga, how is this done at Amgen?
Similarly, I can agree definitely on that. We do have an earlier assessment. We had a project a couple of years ago, which was sort of designing an internal digital tool that helped us to do the early assessment before the protocol is developed. And people who are involved in it is also regulatory, because one of the things that you want to determine is the sourcing strategy, right? Do you have to provide the product centrally? Can sites source it themselves, or the options for the local sourcing as well? So what we do when the product is known, the tool provides available presentations that are in the market and the costing for it. And then regulatory team also has provided inputs per countries. We have some knowledge as well, whether there will be some pushback. Let's say if this country will be centrally sourced, it could delay the trial with 2 months because there will be a resistance from the sites source the product themselves. So there is some intelligence behind the tool. So when this initial assessment is done, which can be a year up to 2 before the trial is starting, we are also asking our suppliers, okay, the tool suggested these presentations. Can you do an actual market assessment, so market intelligence on which are the most available presentations, which backup presentations we should be selecting, because it's something that we've learned the hard way, especially with the current changes in a generic market in Europe, that we do need to have at least 2-3 presentations as a backup already set up and ready to go. So those are just some of the assessments that we're doing at an earlier stage, just to set up ourselves up for success.
I mean, that's great to hear that you're doing this at a very early stage, and it sounds like you have a say on what is going into the protocol to provide you more flexibility. Philip, from the vendor side, how do you see this, and are you getting engaged as early as you feel it is needed sometimes?
Probably we would like to be engaged sometimes earlier. That certainly, but I can only agree with what Pelin and Inga said, and I'm glad to hear that they engage quite early with their clinical ops team on advising on some sourcing product strategies. And we are, as a vendor, we are here to support, right? We are supporting with market intelligence. That's what is really important to give the different options and the different pros and cons for each option, so the sponsor can make a sound decision. It's important to, as well, it's important to monitor the market. Maybe one more word here. Once you have decided on a strategy, it does not mean that strategy will last for the next 3 years, right? Because the market has some disruption. Maybe we come to discuss a little bit drug shortages, which maybe at a given time point you don't expect, right? You can think about it, but you may not plan with it, and this happens afterward when you try to start it. So Inga was mentioning backup solution, backup products, and so on. Definitely, it's important to have how can I say, a strategic view on sourcing comparators, right? Strategic view meaning, okay, what is my risk assessment and what are my backup plan? What is my backup plan?
Thank you.
It's a good
Tony,
point,
anything?
Philippe.
Go ahead, sorry.
I just want to add that with what Philippe mentioned, and something that has happened, right? We have developed a strategy and we're good to go. And just like 3 months, really, the 3 months difference, where we got the offer and then 3 months later we sent the PO, and then the product would be available in 2 months. But because of the manufacturer production schedule, the product no longer is available and will be available only in 6 months. So then we are, we no longer can start the trial on time. So we have asked now in part of the bidding process, show us the lead time currently, and also ask the supplier when are their production schedules. Like by when we need to place an order to be able to actually receive the product within these 2-4 weeks. And when is the next supply available? Because that's something that, we unfortunately learned the hard way. But I feel like that's really helpful if you have that information from the manufacturer. If there are any particularities, you need to place the PO 6 months in advance, or else you will not have that slot anymore available because of these changes that are happening in the industry.
Yeah, I think you're not alone in this situation. There are a couple of others who have learned it that way. But I think, Tony, we had a discussion when preparing for the webinar about this topic and pricing strategies and so on. Can you share your thoughts on this topic?
I think that one of the things that we've discussed and thought about is how could price maybe be used as a little bit of a lever to address some of the concerns around availability. So if we think about the waste as there's more quantity than we need by a large amount. What if we were able to do something where we literally offer a premium in terms of the pricing, but we are then allotted material that is last in, first out instead of first in, first out, so it has more shelf life, those kinds of things. And so can price on the buying side be used as a lever to gain more shelf life or more guarantees around availability? Because as others have said, the material might be available right now, but by the time you issue a PO for it, it's not available. And so how do we mitigate those risks? And is price one of those levers?
Okay, Philip?
Sasha, oh yeah, maybe just one more point on that risk assessment. Commercial supply chain, from my perspective, are getting more complex. I'll give you an example. A product can have multiple steps with vendors today. So one vendor will produce the bulk product, another one, maybe the pharma company will produce a drug substance, and a vendor makes a drug product, another do the packaging, and maybe a third party do even the analysis, right? And it's important as well, if possible, when you build your strategy to understand the complexity of the supply chain of the product you will source. Because afterwards, when you have a temperature excursions or you have a quality event and you need to be fast in resolving and assessing this quality event, if you need to discover your entire supply chain, it will take you a lot of time, and this will be super critical, right? So it's really to go into the gritty-nitty of the commercial supply chain to understand your risks.
And especially if you need to replace a lost batch, for example. Yeah, it's adding a lot of complexity and taking much longer. Thank you for that. Talking about sourcing and sourcing strategy, working with vendors or service providers can be strategic or transactional. And in the complexity of comparator sourcing, and I wouldn't just limit it to comparator sourcing because we're talking about standard of care, co-medication, and other products. What is your preferred option? Are you looking more for a strategic relation with your providers, or is it more transactional one, Pelin?
I can confidently say we're looking for a strong partnership, sustainable partnership with our vendors. So it is, it is important shifting to more like a category management. We also really focused on a therapeutic area specialties to understand their needs. And in order to really understand the therapeutic area needs on the comparator, but also looking at the vendor options to see which one is capable, which one is, compliant and offers broad options for comparators. And clearly, we focus on that. And in order to build strong partnership, we just really keep our pipeline transparent and see what is our possible upcoming studies. I think that really helps to this transparency really helped to build strong partnership. In the end, working with a partner gives more sustainable processes because it's then easier to work together, and then at the same time then how to mitigate certain risks with them better than every time you go transactional. It's like every time you're solving the problem once again, instead of you solve this problem before with them and actually how to work with them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Inga?
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. We have strategic few partners. We choose to only work with a few of the suppliers. We have regular meetings with them. We also provide forecasts to them. We have business review meetings where we review their performance, the improvements, how can they do better also for the bidding process. We look ahead to the forecast, what's coming. The suppliers provide us the insights on how they can support us with the projects that are coming in the pipeline. And it's very important for us to have a good relationship with the project manager, because better relationship you have, more comfortable you feel with the supplier. And there are times when we can also get better offers when we work more directly to each other, right? Because we want to work together with each other. So it's definitely very important to have a very transparent, very good relationship. And we've had times when we work with different suppliers and it just wasn't working, but we bring that issue then, things are not working, something needs to change, and things have improved. they have turned around completely, right? So when something is really, if it's not working, it doesn't mean that you need to end the relationship with the supplier, but if you communicate, if you work together, things will potentially get better as well.
Thank you. Philip, anything you want to add? You're at least raising your hand.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I definitely agree with what was said, but just want to add that this category is just from the financial we mentioned before is very strategic, right? You've spent hundreds of millions, so you cannot look at that category not in a strategic way. That said, we still see in some behavior of sponsors e-auctions in that category, which I think sometimes is a bit weird from my perspective. That said, I think for 10-20% of the volume, you would say it's a commodity, right? It's something that you can run through e-auction because the product is readily available on shelf, and it's very easy to source, right? But for 80% of the category, each project is a new project, and it's really lively. It changes all the time, as we discussed before on the risk assessment topic. So yeah, just from the spend, it's definitely you have to have a strategic view on that.
Perfect, thank you. I want to briefly come back to Inga and Pelin, and it seems that both Amgen and Novartis have a well-established process and early engagement between clinical operations, regulatory teams even, and clinical trial supplies. But I know from experience that that's not always the case. So how easy was this process? Were there specific challenges when trying to engage or establishing a more robust and early engagement between clinical operations and clinical supplies to optimize comparator sourcing? Can you share some of the steps along this way and maybe some of the pitfalls and pain points? Pelin?
I would say it's a long journey. So it's not like overnight, and I would say it's not very long history that, like I'm saying it now, yes, we are involving, we are trying to influence, but if you look at Novartis, it's really it took a long journey. And how did we get here? I would say it takes an enterprise approach, really. Like it takes a giant programs to really move beyond clinical teams. It's really moves every function to a certain direction where we have on time and successful trials, basically. And there were certain enterprise program where they looked at the whole process end to end and clinical trials, and they look what is every person's accountability, what is the interdependencies between each other, and they were able to really identify the key planning parameters. I could tell you, like up to 2 years ago, some of the comparators would never consider at this stage. They would really push through even to feasibility stage, like the site and patient feasibility stage later on, and like basically just 6 months before you go operational. And it's a huge change management activity. It takes a lot of effort. But again, if it's set as a strategic goal for a company to ensure risks are mitigated timely, the lead times of the clinical trials are optimized, and this is like one of the major input, I would say, early planning. And we are just one piece in the puzzle, I would say. There are other things that's been also moved to earlier planning stage, and there are still huge activities going on this year as well in Novartis for this.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Inga?
Yeah, just to add, it's definitely a journey. Like when I joined also the team, we created a kind of comparator optimization team. which is the large project team where we all got together from different departments, which include like regulatory, clinical operations, the site operations, and the supply chain and the setup lead. So really have everyone involved. And we designed this process that I mentioned earlier, right? The digital tool that we have in place. And we said, if this assessment is not completed, we will not purchase. So that was like kind of a line that we put, like no assessment, no procurement. So just to ensure that the clinical operation teams are filling out the process and going through it in earlier time frame, right? Because we had the issue that 6 months before the trial is starting, we need the comparator, and it still can happen with the fast line programs, right? This is something that still does happen, and we do need to reach out to the suppliers unexpectedly because things pulled in sooner than it was initially planned. So it's not 100% proof still. But at least that's what we did. We had that cross-functional team, and we created a process together, and we developed the training, the materials, emphasized the importance, explained it, because it's all also about educating, just bringing those timelines, for everyone to see how long actually is the timeline for sourcing the product and to get that first site activated. So making everyone aware how long it actually takes, and if action is not taken, we really say 8 to 9 months before the study starts is going to be really hard to ensure that the study starts on time. So
Okay.
kind of create that awareness, how important it is if you want to start a trial on time to have this earlier assessment.
For me, this is really a key point, and I already see questions from the audience coming in. So let's look at some of them. And one that I see more frequently coming up as well, and I see it more as a trend, is more in the area of standard of care products. What is your sourcing preference here? Are you sourcing and paying directly as a sponsor, or are you trying to push this to the insurance companies? Pelin?
I'm gonna be honest, like probably I cannot answer as a, on behalf of Novartis and the history of the company for sure, but to my knowledge and to my experience, so there is a balance on, certain products that it really makes sense that it's really sourced through pharmacy and reimbursed, is highly accessible. But when it comes to insurance policies, it's really country specific, even site specific. And they have their own regulations sometimes, or SOPs in the site, that they only accept a patient who has insurance, for example. Like it's sometimes also things are outside of sponsor control, so far to my experience. But we do not proactively go for, at least to my experience, to try to shift to a patient in insurance. And I know that this is also not legal in some countries, that a sponsor has to cover all the medications.
Thank you. Anybody else from the panel? We keep it short and already switch to the next question. Here's an interesting one. For the panel, how do you balance the typical situation that unfolds when researching, procuring comparator products, where customarily the supply chain manager is faced with two choices: purchase directly from the manufacturer in order to get one large lot and the COA, but usually the drawback is the cost and sometimes the expiry date, or purchase through commercial marketplaces, which usually results in lower costs but multiple lots and maybe lack of documentation and other requirements.
I can give a first answer here. So there is no one answer, I must say. So what we see typically is sometimes to get faster, to get your trials started faster, then you would source open market, because the lead times are shorter, usually are shorter compared to if you source from the manufacturer directly. And when you start a trial, the quantity you need is not too high, let's say like that. But once you have the peak in your growth curve for recruitment, obviously you need large quantities, and then depending on the product, we could advise to source direct. So you can have a combination of sourcing direct and sourcing open market. But it really depends on the product, on the lead time, on the shelf life of the product as well. So it's complex. You need to factor a lot of things into your thoughts to make a sound decision.
The other thing that I was just going to just quickly say, the other thing that is a factor here is it's not always even about which is optimal, but there may be cases where the manufacturer, the comparator, simply says, if you go directly to them, no, we don't want to supply it to you for this purpose. And so there's also that aspect.
Yeah, it's also that I wanted to kind of add, it really depends on a trial design. Like often what manufacturer will also request is clinical trial disclosure. Do you want to disclose your clinical trial? If not, you're going to go to the open market. And also, do you really need a COA, right? Depends on which countries are you going. If you're just starting in Europe, you don't need a COA for that purpose. So you can just stick with an open market. But if you want to export it right to the JPEG region, and of course you will need that COA. So it depends on how you're willing to disclose, right? The speed of the trial, how quickly you need the material. And like Philip said, it can happen you start with open market, and then later when you need the larger quantities, you kind of prepare to go to the manufacturer if you're okay with disclosing or if the disclosure is not required.
Thank you. There's a very short question, and maybe I would actually be interested to see the different responses without hearing them. But does anybody know the industry average for or the percentage of clinical trials that include comparators? Maybe Philip, you have a good broad overview on that one, or Tony.
I don't know. I don't know the percentage. Probably I could find it, but I know that the market size is between 4 and 6 billion, let's say, of US dollar. That's the market size. We should look into this data can be retrieved from database like clinicaltrials.gov, but I don't have it by heart now. I'm sorry, but I can provide the answer later. I'm happy to do that.
And maybe that's to all the other questions that we have here. We will try to provide the response from the panel to them later. But Pelin, you wanted to comment?
No comment, but I really wanted Philip to take a guess here. I'm curious as well based on his experience.
Okay, we're looking forward to your answer then, Philip. Here's a question from a good friend of mine. Many larger biopharm companies trend towards local sourcing, local distribution as a strategy to replace site sourcing. What is your opinion on that, and in what products enter regions or countries would you see that as a meaningful strategy? Any risks you would see related to that strategy?
I can answer. Inga, you
please. For local sourcing,
please.
Definitely JPEG China, right? It just makes it easier, so much easier to do local sourcing instead of importing and preparing all the documentation, right? For full documentation for the importation. So China, Japan. There has been some focus also on Europe because we do see that there are certain countries that they have difficulties with site sourcing, mainly because of the reimbursement path or that access is hard for them. So we try to see if we can have a supplier who can support that local sourcing where the labeling is not required, and site can just reach out to that supplier and then Amgen will reimburse it, right? To make it kind of a simpler. So yes, there is, we are exploring that. The risks for that is that you're overseeing multiple suppliers in multiple countries instead of you have, your one SKU in centrally sourced that all the countries are receiving. So definitely adds supply chain complexity, and also who is gonna oversee those suppliers will the clinical operations need to be more and more involved in working with them directly locally, right? So there's definitely some roles and responsibilities that need to be revisited. But it's something that's currently in works because we have noticed that there are some European countries that have expressed that need for additional support for site sourcing.
Just to build on what Inga said, just as a continuation, I think that's what makes it is a key is vendor that you can oversee globally, that has local capability, that enables that and makes really everything more easier for everyone.
And one more point I can add here, it's we were discussing on sourcing strategy. So when you start, so local sourcing only for open label trials. Let's just say that. It's obvious for some of us, but maybe not for everyone in the audience. If you can do site sourcing, you do site sourcing. That's clear, easy. If you cannot, then you may look to local sourcing. But when you set your strategy, depending on the trial design, as this was mentioned, maybe you consider versus a central sourcing, local sourcing strategy, even with the countries involved in the trial. We have done that as an option, and then you can calculate the cost, you can calculate the risk as well. You have local sourcing with central sourcing, and then make a sound decision.
Thank you. We briefly touched on one topic, which is nowadays everybody's talking about is AI. So how do you see, or are you maybe already using AI to streamline the process around comparator sourcing? Tony?
Yeah.
So sorry, I was getting myself off mute there. From what I'm seeing, AI, and this is true in so many areas, in so many industries, is definitely still largely in the experimentation, proof of concepts, minimum viable products, pilots, whatever we want to call them, stage. And so the short answer is there's absolutely potential for AI to be part of the solution to this problem. And figuring out exactly which aspects of the solution AI are most beneficial for is going to be the trick. I don't think we have the answer to that yet, but it needs to be considered as part of the solution set. Is how do we leverage AI?
Thank you.
Actually, go ahead, Pili, please.
No, please.
So I'm super excited on using AI actually. So we have a marketplace, and we are now a few years, we are leveraging historical data and data from many databases we have access to. And we are starting to use, Sasha, we are starting to use AI in finding the best sourcing options for a given project, right? Someone has a need for this product with these countries, in that quantity, in that timelines, and our system is able to give us options based on the data we have. And then obviously you will need the project manager to go through the options and to qualify those options and to look deeper into each of that. But I think AI can really speed up the process at setting the strategy, right? The sourcing strategy for the project. And probably as well understanding better the risks, as we were discussing previously, the risks associated with each option.
Thank you. Pelin?
So there are also a lot of appetite and a lot of activities also going on in Novartis, and I could see that there's already capability built in, either in-house, but also there are a lot of partnership I see with AI vendors as well. And I could say one active thing that went to an implementation stage with us is protocol interpretation. And it basically, the agent looks at the protocol and translates into a supply chain plan, product, quantity, timeline, and this has been tested, and we have I think, a 99% confidence level, and it's something is being implemented now, and this has been implemented now for Novartis products. Our next stage is now to look into, because it's protocol comparator / all commercial product, relatively more complex and may require some specific solution with an agent, and that's our stage 2 basically. But there are so many other opportunities. I mean, when we were discussing these, which one is better, going to manufacturer or going to, you know, open market, I mean, it's really something you should be able to test, give you all your input, how much time it takes you to actually manage a short shelf life versus like, what is the cost? Is it like paying off all your, you know, these kind of things, complex business cases, as I think it's also ideal cases for AI scenarios or building agents. More to
Very
explore.
interesting.
And I do
Yeah.
think one thing that's important to remember with AI in this area, because we see this pretty frequently, is that understanding where we're using AI in terms of analytics and recommendations versus where we're using agentic AI, and we want AI to actually make some decisions and generate workflows. And when we're using so AI, agentic AI, and then generative AI, you mentioned, Pelin, like being able to create a supply plan based on a protocol. So understanding where the different aspects of AI fit optimally is also really important here.
Thank you, Tony. Inga, where does Amgen stand in that regards?
There's a lot of initiatives ongoing with AI that it's hard to keep track on, but similar to Pelin, right? This translating the protocol into the design, supply chain design, that's a pretty common one that we are kind of looking at. And one other one that I was thinking about is, as well as we talked about deciding on supply strategy, right? We do have this tool currently that we have, and then using AI, can we make it even more simpler and can we get more insights in it? And it's also, I think we just need to figure out what kind of data we want to tap into, right? What kind of data we have access to be able to have a better assessment or suggestion that AI is providing for the supply strategies.
Perfect.
There's
Thank you.
definitely a lot can improve, and I think a lot will change in how we decide on the sourcing strategy.
We have an active group here with a lot of additional questions, but I believe we only have time for one more, and that one might go directly to Philip, and it's myth or reality, reintroducing, reselling comparator medication back into the commercial supply chain. When I heard first about it, it sounded like counterfeiting, but Philip, can you share your experience, your thought on this topic, and if this is actually happening?
Yeah, this is happening, but I'm not sure I can do in 1 minute. So these participants from waste management are different means. So in US, you will have a model which is called reverse distribution. In Europe, it's more resell. So we have some models in place where we have agreements to resell or not to take a stock. This can, so a last minute change. So sometimes I have experienced sponsors buying a stock and the week after, oh, I don't need it anymore, right? So it's about how do we bring flexibility in the supply chain. It will last a few minutes to give some examples here, but this is something that we strive to do better, and we do. Just keep in mind that if you go direct with a manufacturer, this will be a bit challenging often to bring that flexibility, because once it has left their warehouse, it's difficult to resell their product. So resell is really connected with the open market sourcing.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to close the discussion here, and thank you to the entire panel and for the active discussion. And I hand it over back to Bill Coakley.
Thank you, Sasha. And on behalf of BSMA, I'd like to thank you and all the panelists for today's webinar. Also to remind the audience that anybody who registered for this event will receive a recording of it probably next week. And last, but certainly not least, there are several other webinars that are scheduled between now and the end of the year. The next two, which will be in early November, will be one on the power of AI and another one on IRT. So if anybody's interested in registering for those or joining a steering committee or one of our workstream groups, by all means, you're welcome. Just go to the website and you'll see there how to do so. So again, thanks again for joining, and I'm signing off.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.